Hi guys, and welcome to Anunnaki Sanctuary's channel. Tonight we walk onto a low, rounded hill in southeastern Turkey where the wind feels like it has been combing the grass for 10,000 years. And the moonlight makes the stones look like they are holding their breath. You are standing at Göbeklitepe, the kind of place that makes your brain do that thing where it tries to time travel, then immediately demands a snack because time travel is stressful. The air is cool, the horizon is wide, and even the silence has texture, like velvet stretched over hidden shapes. Here is your cheeky reality check. By the way, you probably won't survive this emotionally, not because anything jumps out at you, but because your certainty does not. This site has a talent for melting confident opinions into puddles, and you're going to watch it happen in slow motion. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and your local time in the comments, because I love picturing this story drifting into bedrooms and late-night kitchens all over the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start walking, and you can feel the hill under your feet like a gentle spine. The name Göbeklitepe gets translated as Potbelly Hill, which is a little rude, honestly, but also kind of perfect. It is not a dramatic mountain. It is a rounded rise that looks harmless until you remember what is inside it. Beneath that quiet mound are the circles of stone pillars, arranged with intention, carved with animals, and built long before the pyramids, long before Stonehenge, long before people were supposed to be doing things like this at all. That last part is important, because it is where the internet starts vibrating with excitement. Tonight, you are not here to get swept away by vibes alone. You are here for a calm guide through what is proven versus what is speculated. Think of it like you are carrying two baskets. One basket is for evidence, things that have been excavated, measured, dated, photographed, analyzed, and argued over in the normal, slightly boring way science likes. The other basket is for speculation, interpretations, guesses, big claims, and the sort of story ideas that tend to arrive wearing sunglasses at night. You keep both baskets. You do not shame the speculation basket. You just label it clearly, like a responsible adult who knows the difference between medicine and candy. Yes, both come in little bottles. No, you should not mix them. The proven basket begins with a simple, mainstream historical fact. Göbeklitepe is a prehistoric archaeological site in southeastern Turkey. The oldest layers of its monumental structures date to the pre-pottery Neolithic, roughly the 10th millennium BCE. In human terms, you're looking at a project that begins around 9600 BCE. Give or take the wiggle room of dating, that is the part that hits people in the chest. This is very early for megalithic architecture, and it sits right at the dawn of the Neolithic transition in this region. Now you look at the hill and you imagine the ground as a layered cake. Because your brain is trying to make archaeology edible, the topsoil is the frosting. Under that are layers of fill, rubble, and time. Archaeologists read these layers like chapters, and the big proven concept here is stratigraphy, which is just a fancy word for older stuff tends to be underneath newer stuff unless someone messes with it. At Göbeklitepe, someone definitely messed with it, but in a very interesting way that you will get to later. For now, you keep it simple. The site contains multiple stone enclosures, and what you see in photos, those famous T-shaped pillars, are part of several circular or oval arrangements. You step closer to the protected area, the modern shelter that arches over the excavation like a giant, quiet umbrella, Even the contemporary architecture is trying not to interrupt the mood. The stones below are pale, and in the moonlight they look almost like bone, which is a little dramatic but also accurate for how ancient they feel. Here is what is proven about those pillars. They are large, carved limestone monoliths, often shaped like a T, and some are decorated with reliefs of animals. The T shape is not a random design choice. It is consistent, repeated, and paired with other repeating elements, like the positioning of two taller central pillars in some enclosures. That pattern is evidence of planning, shared ideas, and skilled labor. It also suggests that whoever built this was not just stacking rocks on a whim between hunting trips. They had a plan, and the plan had style. Now, into the speculation basket goes the interpretation that the T-pillars are definitely human figures, definitely gods, definitely aliens, definitely an ancient global priesthood, definitely a calendar, definitely a message to the future, definitely a warning, definitely a spaceship landing pad, definitely your cousin's astrology chart carved in stone. You are allowed to hear those ideas, because they are part of the cultural storm around Göbeklitepe. But you are not allowed to pretend they are facts just because they sound exciting to some... So you take a slow breath and you practice the key phrase you will use all night. What does the evidence actually show? The evidence shows carved animals. It shows pillars placed in deliberate arrangements. It shows the site was used and modified over time. It shows that people returned here repeatedly. It shows that the builders had stone tools capable of quarrying and shaping limestone. It shows that there are remains of everyday life nearby and within fills, including stone tools and animal bones. Those bones matter because they tell you about diet, hunting, and feasting, and they anchor your imagination to real mouths eating real meals. Now your mind wants to jump straight to the big headline, "This changes everything." And yes, it does nudge your mental timeline. But you do not let it run away with you. You remind yourself that changes everything is usually a phrase said by someone who is about to sell you something, like a subscription box of ancient mysteries. Historians still argue whether Göbeklitepe is best described primarily as a ritual center, a social gathering place, a set of shrines, or something more integrated with daily life than the word temple implies. That debate is real, mainstream, and ongoing. It is not a battle between sensible archaeologists and unhinged podcasters. It is mostly a battle between different sensible archaeologists who all have caffeine habits and strong opinions. The quirky or fringe tidbit you tuck into your pocket tonight is this. People sometimes call Göbeklitepe the first temple, and some fringe storytellers stretch that into the first religion, or even proof that civilization began with worship. That is not proven. What is proven is that it is monumental and likely had special meaning. The leap to first religion is like looking at a campfire and announcing you have discovered the invention of cuisine. Maybe, but also, calm down. You keep walking along the perimeter where the ground slopes gently away. In your imagination, the hill peels back time. You picture groups arriving with baskets, stone tools, and stories. You picture the rhythm of labor, quarrying, dragging, carving, lifting. You picture the sound of flint on limestone, the scrape, the tap, the pause. Then you picture someone saying, "Okay, who is in charge of snacks?" Because humans do not change that much. This is where you set your calm guide rules. Right here on the hill with the wind and the quiet. Rule 1. If a claim can be tested against excavated material, dates, or measurable features, it belongs in the proven basket, or at least in the supported side of it. Rule 2. If a claim depends on assuming intentions, secret knowledge, or unseen forces, it is speculation, and you label it as such. Rule 3. If a claim says everyone knows or they don't want you to know, you gently escort it out like a drunk guest at a polite dinner party. Rule 4. You are allowed to enjoy wonder without turning it into certainty. Wonder is free. Certainty is expensive. You stop for a moment, and you look down at the pillars again. They do not explain themselves, and that is part of their power. Archaeology is not a magic trick where the past pops out of a hat fully narrated. It is more like rebuilding a song from a few surviving notes. You can get close. You can feel the melody. But you also have to accept the quiet gaps. As you turn your attention forward, you promise yourself you will move step by step, layer by layer, claim by claim. You are going to learn how the site was found, how it was dated, what the carvings show, and where the debates truly are. And you're going to keep one hand on the evidence basket the whole time. Because the speculation basket is the one that tries to sprint off into the night yelling, "I solved it." You take another slow breath. The hill feels steady under you. The moonlight does not hurry. And you continue onward, letting the proven stones lead and letting the speculations follow behind at a polite, sleepy distance. You keep moving along the gentle curve of the shelter, and the hill feels less like a single place and more like a stack of moments pressed together. The calm rule you set a minute ago stays with you, evidence in one hand, imagination in the other, and no letting imagination drive the car. Because if it does, it immediately speeds into a fog bank while yelling, "Trust me, I've got a feeling." Now you slide into the next proven question. How does anyone even find something like this? You picture the landscape as it would have looked before modern paths, before visitor signs, before the protective canopy. Just a mound, a lumpy rise in a region full of other rises. Southeast Anatolia is not short on old things hiding under dirt. The proven part is that Göbeklitepe was recognized as an archaeological site and then systematically excavated. And that recognition did not happen because somebody tripped over a portal to Atlantis. It happened through surveying, prior knowledge of the region, and the kind of stubborn curiosity that makes archaeologists crawl around in heat and dust for years. The mound had surface finds, including worked flint and fragments of limestone, that signaled human activity. That is not glamorous, but it is how reality usually reminds you it exists. A mainstream historical fact to anchor you here. Organized archaeological work at Göbeklitepe is strongly associated with the German Archaeological Institute and Turkish authorities, and major excavations began in the mid-1990s under archaeologist Klaus Schmidt. That is a name you will hear a lot around this site, because he was one of the central figures in bringing its significance into global focus. He did not discover the hill out of nowhere, but his team's work transformed it from interesting mound to this is going to rewrite lectures. So you let yourself imagine Schmidt and colleagues walking the mound, noticing the density of worked stone, sensing something unusual beneath. The evidence comes in layers. It is not one dramatic reveal. It is trench by trench, stone by stone, paperwork by paperwork. Yes, paperwork. If you ever want to kill a conspiracy theory, introduce it to the fact that archaeology involves permits, inventories, drawings, conservation plans, and meetings where someone argues about where to put a protective fence. Secret alien cover-ups are not great at committee work. You drift a little closer to the edge where you can see cut stone emerging from the earth. The proven method that matters here is excavation itself, the disciplined act of removing soil in controlled contexts. Archaeologists do not just dig. They record, they map, they photograph, they label, they track relationships between objects and layers. That relationship is everything. A carved pillar sitting in its original position inside an enclosure is not the same as a carved pillar that got moved in the 1970s by somebody trying to make a cool garden feature. Context is the difference between a sentence and a pile of letters. And Göbeklitepe is basically a lesson in context. The hill is not a natural pile of limestone that just happened to form rings of pillars. It is a mound that grew through time as structures were built, used, modified, filled in, and built over again. That is the part you feel even without touching anything. The ground is thick with human decisions. Archaeologists call this kind of accumulated settlement or activity mound a tell in many Near Eastern contexts. Though Göbeklitepe is a bit unusual because it is not a classic village tell in the way some nearby sites are. Still, the idea holds. Human activity creates layers, and layers create a mound. Now you scoop a handful of proven into your basket. The site's significance is supported by stratigraphy, artifact distributions, and multiple radiocarbon dates from organic material associated with the occupation layers. You can almost hear the calm click of that word, associated, because that is where the careful thinking lives. Archaeologists date charcoal, bone, and other organics found in or linked to layers, and then interpret how those dates relate to the building phases. It is not as simple as dating the stone itself. Stone does not come with a birthday candle. This is where historians still argue whether certain dates reflect the construction of specific enclosures or later activities within them. It is not that the dates are fake. It is that the relationship between dated material and the act of building can be complex. Think of it like finding a receipt in your couch. It tells you when the receipt was made, not necessarily when the couch was built. It still tells you something real. But you have to be precise about what. You pause, and your mind wanders to the earliest moments the site was noticed. Here comes the quirky tidbit. Göbeklitepe was recorded in earlier surveys decades before the big excavations, but it was not recognized for what it was. Some accounts describe it being interpreted as a medieval cemetery or a less remarkable site. Whether every detail of that story is cleanly documented or has been polished by retelling, the broader point is extremely believable. Archaeology is full of places that sit in plain sight until someone asks the right question. The past does not always announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes it just sits there quietly like a cat, judging you. Now you move to the heart of what's proven versus speculated about the excavations. Proven, only a small percentage of the mound has been excavated so far. That means what you see is a sample, not the full book. There are geophysical surveys, like ground-penetrating radar and other techniques, that suggest more structures beneath. Those methods are like listening through a wall. You can hear shapes, echoes, anomalies. You cannot claim you know the whole conversation until you open the door. Speculated, because much remains unexcavated. People sometimes fill the unknown with whatever they personally find delicious. Hidden chambers, secret libraries, a map of the stars, a sealed vault of forbidden technology. The calm correction is simple. Unexcavated does not mean mystical. It means unexcavated. The most thrilling thing under the hill is probably more of what is already proven. More pillars, more walls, more fill, more evidence of how people organized space. That is plenty thrilling if you let it be. You keep walking, and you notice how the modern walkways keep you from stepping on anything fragile. That is conservation, another proven reality that shapes what you know. Archaeology is destructive by nature. When you excavate a layer, you remove it. You cannot put it back the way it was. So the site becomes a balance between learning and preserving. That affects how fast digging happens and what areas get prioritized. It also affects why some claims are premature. If someone says, "We know exactly what the whole site means," you should picture an archaeologist quietly staring at them like, "We haven't even finished labeling the bagged flint from Trench 7. Here is another mainstream fact you tuck in. Göbeklitepe sits within a broader region that has other important pre-pottery Neolithic sites, and comparisons matter. Archaeologists do not interpret it in isolation. They look at architecture, tools, symbolism, and subsistence patterns across multiple sites to see what is shared and what is unique. That is how you avoid making Göbeklitepe a lonely, magical anomaly. It is extraordinary, yes, but it is also part of a world where humans were experimenting with new social and economic patterns. Historians still argue whether Göbeklitepe is an outlier ritual center visited by dispersed groups or part of a more settled pattern of life than the earliest interpretation suggested. That debate depends on ongoing excavation, new analyses, and the humble acceptance that first impressions change. You let yourself enjoy a small joke to keep things light, because you are still you. If you ever feel insecure about your productivity, just remember, some people 10,000 years ago organized multi-ton stone projects without group chats. Meanwhile, you cannot even schedule brunch without 3 cancellations and a doodle poll. The ancestors are watching, and they are disappointed. But as you breathe, the joke fades and the calm returns. You see the hill differently now, not as a single mystery, but as a carefully excavated argument. The dirt is not just dirt, it is the archive. The trenches are not wounds, they are windows. And every measurement, every map, every recorded layer is a way of turning wonder into knowledge without crushing the wonder. You keep walking, and the next question begins forming in your mind like a slow sunrise. If we can find it and map it and excavate it, how do we actually date it with confidence? You feel that pull forward, and you follow it. One quiet step at a time. You keep that steady pace along the walkway, and the night air feels slightly colder now, like the hill is reminding you that time is not your friend, it is your landlord. You're renting these insights by the minute, so you might as well use them. The next proven versus speculated battlefield is dating. Everyone loves to say, it's 12,000 years old. Like that number is carved into the limestone in a neat little font. But dating is a craft, not a magic spell. And the calm approach is to understand what the methods actually do. Here is your mainstream historical fact for this section. The earliest monumental structures at Göbeklitepe belong to the pre-pottery Neolithic A and early pre-pottery Neolithic B periods. And radiocarbon dating of organic materials associated with these layers places major activity broadly in the 10th and 9th millennia BCE. That is the clean, defensible statement. It is already impressive. You do not need to inflate it like a balloon animal. Now, you step mentally into the lab, because behind every dramatic headline about the oldest is someone in a white coat gently trying not to contaminate a sample with a crumb from their lunch. Radiocarbon dating works on organic material, meaning once living things like charcoal, seeds, bone collagen, and plant remains. The key calm point is this. Radiocarbon dating does not date the stone pillars. It dates organic material that is found in specific contexts. And then archaeologists interpret how those contexts relate to construction, use, and abandonment. That relationship is the hinge your whole proven door swings on. So you picture a piece of charcoal in a layer of fill. Was it from a hearth that burned during the building phase? Was it from a later fire after the enclosure was already standing? Was it swept in from elsewhere? This is why archaeologists get so intense about context. It is not because they love rules. It is because time is slippery. You keep walking and imagine the site as a stage where multiple performances happened. Some of the props stayed. Some got moved. Some got buried. The dates you get are like ticket stubs left on the floor. They prove someone was there around that time. They do not always prove exactly what scene was happening when it fell. Historians still argue whether some radiocarbon samples at Göbeklitepe reflect the initial construction dates of certain enclosures or later activity connected to their use and infilling. That scholarly debate is not a weakness. It is the normal process of refining a timeline in a complex site. Now, what is proven? Proven is that the dates cluster in a window that is shockingly early for monumental stone architecture. Proven is that the site's earliest major phase is older than classic megalithic monuments in Europe by millennia. Proven is that the site was active for a long time, with multiple building episodes and changes. Proven is also that the site's later phases involve smaller structures and different architectural patterns, suggesting shifts in how the place was used. What is speculated? People often take an early date and then attach it to a neat, cinematic narrative. It's exactly 11,600 years old. Therefore, it must be connected to this specific cosmic event. Or, it dates to the end of the last ice age, so clearly it is a message from a lost civilization. Or the classic, they knew something we don't. That last one is technically always true because they knew where the good hunting spots were, and you would probably get lost within 10 minutes. But you get what I mean. Here comes your quirky or fringe tidbit for this section. You will sometimes hear the claim that Göbeklitepe encodes a precise date for a catastrophic event, like a comet impact, and that the carvings are a kind of time stamp. This idea gets linked to specific motifs and supposed astronomical markers. It is not proven. It is a hypothesis that depends on interpreting symbols as constellations and then aligning them with a proposed sky configuration. That is a long chain, and long chains break at weak links. The calm response is not to laugh, but to ask, are the identifications of the constellations widely accepted? Are the alignments statistically meaningful? Is there independent corroboration? In most cases, the answer is that it remains speculative and contested, not a settled conclusion. You return to your evidence basket and keep it solid. Radiocarbon dates are calibrated because the amount of carbon-14 in the atmosphere has varied over time. Calibration curves adjust raw radiocarbon years into calendar years. This is another place where people get confused. You will see dates reported with ranges, not single numbers. That is normal. If someone gives you an exact year and speaks with absolute certainty, they are either simplifying for a general audience or selling you something shaped like certainty. And here is another quiet reality. Samples can have problems. Charcoal can come from old wood, making it seem older than the event you are trying to date. Bones can be contaminated. Contexts can be mixed. That does not mean the whole method is junk. It means you use multiple samples, multiple contexts, and multiple lines of evidence to build confidence. Archaeology is like a court case where you want several witnesses, not one dramatic monologue. You walk past the pillars again, and you let the mind do its sleepy thing, imagining hands carving, eyes watching, voices murmuring. Then you stop yourself gently. You do not actually know the voices. You do not know the words. You do not know the prayers. If there were prayers, that is the boundary between proven and imagined. Still, you can know some things about time. You can know that the site's earliest monumental enclosures are older than pottery in the region, which is why the period is called pre-pottery Neolithic. You can know that agriculture is emerging in the broader region over this long time frame, and that Göbeklitepe sits in a world where people are experimenting with managing plants and animals, even if they are not yet living the fully settled farming lifestyle you picture when you hear Neolithic. The timeline is not a switch flipping, it is a dimmer, Historians still argue whether Göbeklitepe's monumental construction came before, after, or alongside early cultivation practices in the region, and how direct the relationship is. Some interpretations suggest ritual gathering could have helped drive social cohesion that later supported farming. Others caution that the relationship is more tangled, and that people were already on the path toward cultivation for many reasons, including climate stability and resource opportunities. Either way, the debate is grounded in real evidence, not just vibes. You let in one light joke? Because you deserve it. Calibrated date ranges are basically archaeology's way of saying, I'm not ignoring your question. I'm just emotionally unavailable to give you a single number. And honestly, respect. Now you circle back to what you can say calmly, as if you are explaining it to a friend who is about to fall asleep with their phone on their chest. Proven. Organic remains in certain layers date to the early Neolithic, around the 10th to 9th millennia BCE, placing the site among the earliest known monumental stone constructions. Likely, different enclosures were built and used at different times within that broad window, and the site's use evolved. Unknown. The exact year each pillar was erected, the precise sequence of every architectural change, and the full social story behind why people invested energy here. And because you are you add a final sleepy caution. The phrase, older than the pyramids, is true, but also kind of meaningless, because it makes you picture Göbeklitepe as a proto-Egypt, which it is not. It is its own world. It is hunter-gatherers and early villagers at the edge of big transitions, building something that feels like a question mark made of stone. You take another slow step, and you feel the next topic rising naturally. If you can date the layers, and you can map the structures, then the next thing your eyes want is detail. The pillars themselves, the shape, the carvings, the physical facts you can touch with your mind without turning them into a fantasy. So you keep walking, letting the moonlight skim the limestone, and you drift toward the T-pillars, ready to sort what is measurable from what is myth. You move closer to the heart of what people come here to see. And even at night, you can feel the presence of those T-shaped pillars like quiet sentries. They do not loom in a horror movie way. They loom in an I have been here longer than your entire language way. The limestone catches faint light, and the carvings look like they are waking up slowly, stretching their animal limbs. Now you are in the zone where proven can be pleasantly concrete. Measurements, shapes, placement, tool marks, things that do not care what you believe. The mainstream historical fact you tuck into your pocket here is simple and sturdy. The monumental enclosures at Göbeklitepe contain T-shaped limestone pillars, some weighing many tons, often arranged in circles or ovals with two taller central pillars. And several pillars carry relief carvings of animals and abstract symbols. That is not a vibe. That is architecture you can map. You stand with your hands in your pockets because touching is not allowed, and also because your hands would probably start pointing dramatically, like you are narrating a documentary to a flock of confused pigeons. The T-shape itself is fascinating. The head is a horizontal cap. The body is a vertical shaft. Many pillars are smoothed and shaped with a confidence that implies experience and planning. On some, you see carved arms running down the sides, hands meeting near the front, and what looks like a belt or loincloth that matters. It supports, but does not conclusively prove, an interpretation that the pillars represent stylized human or anthropomorphic figures. Evidence for anthropomorphism goes into the supported side of your basket, not the fully proven side, because interpretation always rides on how you read the forms. Historians still argue whether the T-pillars are best understood as representations of human-like beings, ancestors, deities, or something more symbolic, like pillars as persons in a ritual sense without being literal portraits. You feel the debate like a low hum. It is not a fight about whether the stones exist. It is a fight about meaning. Now you do the calm, proven versus speculated sorting in real time. Proven, these are deliberately quarried and carved limestone monoliths. Proven, the site's builders had the tools and techniques to shape stone with precision, likely using flint tools and abrasion methods. Proven, the arrangement of pillars is structured. In at least some enclosures, there are two larger central pillars facing each other, with smaller pillars set around them. Proven, the pillars were not just plopped down randomly. There are sockets, stone walls, and architectural elements that integrate them into planned spaces. Speculated, these are definitely gods. These are definitely alien visitors wearing T-shaped helmets. These are definitely giant stone stick figures to scare away predators. These are definitely a priestly caste showing off. You smile sleepily at the alien one, because it always shows up like a late guest with a dramatic scarf. The calm rule is, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. For aliens, you would want evidence of non-local materials, advanced tool traces beyond known technologies, or some artifact that simply cannot be explained in the cultural and technological context. You do not have that here. What you have is human-level ingenuity, which is honestly more impressive and far more common. You walk a few steps and let your eyes roam over the reliefs. The carvings are not faint doodles. They are confident. The animals are recognizable. Some are in profile. Some have stylized forms. You see foxes, boars, snakes, birds, and other creatures that would have been part of the local ecosystem and local imagination. This is where the evidence basket gets heavier in a good way. The imagery is real, visible, and repeated across pillars. That suggests shared symbolic language. But then comes the slippery part. What does a fox mean? What does a snake mean? Does a vulture mean death? Does a boar mean strength? Does a scorpion mean, do not step here barefoot? Which would be the most practical warning sign in human history? Here is your quirky tidbit for the section. Some interpretations emphasize that certain animals, like vultures, might connect to mortuary practices, because vultures appear in other Neolithic iconography associated with exposing bodies to scavenging birds. That is not fringe. It is a plausible comparative idea. The fringe part happens when people take a single animal image and declare it a complete, decoded message, like, this is a map of the cosmos and also a recipe. The calm approach is to treat the carvings as meaningful without insisting you know the exact meaning. You drift closer to a central pair of pillars in your mind, because those are the ones that make your stomach do that little flip. Two tall stones, standing like a conversation frozen in time. The space around them feels like it was designed to focus attention. Even if you do not know the rituals, you can feel the architecture directing the human body. You stand here. You face this way. You look at these. You gather around those. That is proven in the sense that architecture shapes behavior. You do not need to know the exact script to see the stage. Historians still argue whether these enclosures were roofed, partially roofed, or open to the sky. This debate matters because it changes how you imagine sound, light, and movement. If there was a roof, then the space could have been more enclosed, more intimate, more controlled. If open, then the sky itself is part of the experience, and alignments become more tempting to speculate about. The evidence includes post holes, wall structures, and how the stones weather, but nothing forces a single answer. So you keep it in the debated box, which is a perfectly respectable box. Now you let in a light joke to keep the night friendly. If these enclosures were roofed, You just know someone complained about the acoustics. The chanting is great, but the echo makes my voice sound weird. 10,000 years later, nothing changes. Humans still blame ceilings. You turn your attention to the craftsmanship. The pillars are not all identical. Some are taller. Some have more elaborate carvings. That suggests variation in function or importance. It could suggest different building phases or different groups contributing. It could suggest a hierarchy of spaces. But you keep the difference between suggests and proves clear. Because that line is the difference between archaeology and bedtime fan fiction. Proven. Some pillars have carved belts and what appear to be garments. Proven. Some have arms and hands. That makes the anthropomorphic reading stronger. Speculated. Exactly who or what they depict. Ancestors. Mythic beings. Clan symbols. Personified forces. This is where your mind wants to assign personalities. You picture one central pillar as stern, the other as smug. Stop it, you tell yourself gently. They are stones, not sitcom characters. Even if the temptation is strong, here is another solid, proven point. There is evidence of quarrying nearby. The builders did not import these stones from another planet. They carved them from local limestone. That means labor, coordination, and knowledge of stoneworking. The how is human, and the how is already astonishing. Imagine organizing dozens of people to drag and raise multi-tonned pillars using ropes, levers, and sheer stubbornness. You have trouble organizing your sock drawer. Now you feel the story glide forward into the deeper question. What were these enclosures for? The pillars are the body, but function is the heartbeat. And that heartbeat is where speculation likes to dress up as certainty. Still, you can keep your calm guide posture. Proven. The pillars and enclosures are monumental, planned, and symbolically decorated. Likely, the spaces hosted gatherings that had special meaning, possibly ritual, social, or both. Unknown, the precise beliefs, names, myths, and ceremonies that animated these stones. You take one more long look, letting the reliefs become shadows, letting the shadows become imagination, but not letting imagination become proof. And as you continue along the walkway, you realize the next thing your mind wants is pattern. The animals, the repetition, the sense that the carvings might be a language. So you drift onward, ready to read the animals like a calm detective who refuses to accuse the first suspect just because they look dramatic in moonlight. You keep gliding along the stone-lined path, and the carvings start to feel less like decoration and more like a crowd of creatures gathered for a meeting you are not invited to. The foxes look alert. The snakes look like they are mid-sentence, and the birds carry that timeless, I know something you don't expression that birds have perfected across all eras. You slow down because this is the part where people begin whispering the word code, and your calm guide instincts immediately sit up like a watchdog. First, you load your evidence basket with what is solid, mainstream historical fact. Many Göbeklitepe pillars display relief carvings of animals and symbols, including foxes, snakes, boars, birds, and other motifs, and these images appear repeatedly across different enclosures. That repetition is measurable. You can count motifs. You can compare styles. You can map where certain animals appear more often. You can do real analysis without turning into a late-night decoder ring enthusiast. Now you let your eyes move from pillar to pillar in your mind, watching how animals appear in profile, sometimes overlapping, sometimes isolated, sometimes arranged in ways that make your brain itch with the desire to interpret. Your brain goes, "This is obviously a message," and you gently reply, or it is obviously a bunch of animals carved by people who lived with those animals. Both can be true, but only one is guaranteed. Proven, The animals carved here are largely species that make sense for the region and the time. They are not unicorns, they are not dinosaurs, they are not suspiciously modern. That matters because it grounds the iconography in lived experience. These people hunted, feared, respected, and watched these creatures. When you carve a snake, it is not just an idea, it is a memory of a snake you almost stepped on. When you carve a boar, it is not just symbolism. It is the fact that boars can be terrifying, especially if you are out there with stone tools and questionable life insurance. Now you drift into the interpretive zone, where the calm guide voice lowers and slows. Animals in prehistoric art can carry multiple layers of meaning at once: practical, spiritual, social, and aesthetic. A fox can be food, trickster, clan emblem, or simply that clever little menace that stole our leftovers. You do not have the key. What you do have are patterns. So you sort proven patterns you can safely hold. Certain animals appear frequently and across multiple enclosures. The carvings are deliberate and skilled, not random scratches. The choice of animals is consistent with local fauna and cultural continuity across early Neolithic sites in the region. Speculative interpretations you label clearly. Each animal equals a specific constellation. Each animal equals a specific month. The set of animals forms a single sentence that can be translated. The animals encode a global catastrophe date. The carvings are a universal language shared with distant civilizations. You do not reject all interpretation. You just refuse to let interpretation cosplay as proof. Historians still argue whether the animal imagery at Göbeklitepe is primarily totemic, mythological, protective, commemorative, or connected to specific ritual practices like feasting or mortuary rites. Notice how all of those options are plausible, and notice how none of them can be nailed down with a single confident sentence. That is the honest landscape. Now, the word code itself is the trap. A code implies a stable key and a consistent one-to-one mapping, like fox equals X, snake equals Y, and then you decode a neat message. Human symbolism rarely behaves that politely. It is messy. It changes with context. It depends on audience. It can be deliberately ambiguous. If you have ever sent a text that said fine and meant, "I will remember this forever," you already understand prehistoric symbolism better than you think. Here comes a quirky tidbit that is not pure fringe but has that delicious factor. In some enclosures, the imagery seems to emphasize animals that feel more dangerous than edible, like snakes and scorpions, and that has led some researchers to consider whether certain motifs might be apotropaic, meaning meant to ward off harm or to mark a boundary between ordinary space and special space. That idea is plausible. People across many cultures use fierce imagery to protect sacred or significant places. But the leap from protective imagery to "this is a literal warning sign about radioactive waste" goes straight into the speculation basket with a bright neon label. You linger on the birds for a moment, because birds tend to make people's imaginations sprint. In other Neolithic contexts, birds, especially vultures, have been linked by some scholars to mortuary practices, like exposure of bodies and the transformation between life and death. That does not prove the same meaning at Göbeklitepe, but it creates a comparative framework. Comparative frameworks are how you build careful interpretation without going full conspiracy. Still, you keep the phrase ready. Historians still argue whether those bird images at Göbeklitepe connect to mortuary rites or represent something else entirely, like status symbols, mythic beings, or a shared storytelling tradition. Now you slide into the specific proven versus speculated theme again. What can you actually say the animals do functionally in the space? Proven. They communicate. Not in the sense of "here is the translation," but in the sense of visual messaging. They mark the pillars as meaningful objects. They are not blank supports. They are statements. They would have been seen, recognized, and reacted to by people standing here. The carvings shape attention. They shape mood. They might shape rules. This enclosure belongs to this group. This animal matters here. This is not a place for casual snacks and gossip. Or maybe it is exactly a place for snacks and gossip, and the animals are the conversation starters. Humans love a themed venue. Light joke number 1. Gently placed. Imagine you are a hunter-gatherer arriving after a long walk, and you see an entire pillar covered in snakes. You are like, ah, yes, the snake room. My favorite. Completely relaxing. Definitely not going to check my sandals every 3 seconds. You keep scanning motifs, and you notice the tension between realism and stylization. Some animals look naturalistic. Others feel emblematic. That suggests the imagery is not purely observational art. It is designed. And design implies intention. But again, intention is not the same as a decipherable code. Here is where the fringe tends to sneak in, wearing a lab coat. If it is intentional, it must be astronomical. Astronomy is tempting because it feels measurable. You can calculate ancient skies. You can point to alignments. But the step you cannot skip is demonstrating that the symbols reliably match constellations in a way that is culturally plausible and statistically robust. Otherwise, it is pattern finding. And humans are spectacular at pattern finding. You can see faces in clouds. You can see prophecies in toast. You can definitely see Orion in a carved fox if you try hard enough. Light joke number 2. If you stare at these carvings long enough, your brain will start assigning them to your own life. This boar is clearly my 2025, chaotic and determined. Stop. Breathe. Touch grass. Preferably grass without scorpions. Now you plant yourself again in what you can responsibly hold. Proven, the animals are part of a repeated visual repertoire across the site. Likely, the repertoire reflects shared beliefs, stories, and social identities among groups who use the site. Unknown whether there is a single unified system across all enclosures or multiple systems changing over time. This changing over time part matters. Göbeklitepe is not one moment frozen. It is a sequence. Different enclosures may be built by different groups, at different times, for different reasons, even if they share a broader cultural world. Historians still argue whether the variation in animal motifs reflects different social groups, different functions of enclosures, or simply shifting artistic choices over generations. This is a real academic debate, and it is much more interesting than they were definitely writing star coordinates. You notice how the carvings also play with placement. Some high, some low, some facing inward, some outward. That could matter. It could be aesthetic. It could be symbolic. But you resist the urge to declare. The calm guide does not declare. The calm guide describes, compares, and keeps room for uncertainty. Light joke number 3. Soft and sleepy. If this is a code, it is the kind of code your friend uses when they say, "I'm not mad," and then rearranges your entire life. In other words, technically a message, but good luck decoding it without context. As you continue, the animals start to feel less like a puzzle to solve and more like a world to step into. Fox, snake, boar, bird. These are not abstract. They are the cast of the local landscape. They are reminders that early Neolithic life is intimate with wildness. You are not living behind walls with a pantry. You are living beside teeth, venom, hooves, and wings. Bringing those animals into carved stone could be reverence, fear, storytelling, identity. or all of it layered together like the soil above these enclosures. And that thought carries you forward naturally to the next question that waits ahead. Warm as a low lantern. If these images and pillars suggest special meaning, what do you call this place? Temple, shrine, gathering hall, something else entirely? The label matters because labels change how your mind feels the space. So you keep moving, animals watching from stone, and you let the question form without forcing the answer. You keep walking, and the carvings fade behind you just enough for your mind to start doing what it loves, slapping labels on things. Your brain wants to call Göbeklitepe a temple, because temples are a category your modern self understands. Temples have rules. Temples have priests. Temples have incense. Probably. Temples have gift shops, if you are unlucky. But the calm guide part of you gently takes your brain by the wrist and says, "Easy. We are going to earn our labels tonight." So you let the most famous phrase float into view, the world's first temple. Now you do the proven versus speculated sorting like you are sifting sand for tiny beads. Mainstream historical fact. Many researchers interpret Göbeklitepe as a site with strong ritual or ceremonial functions, in part because of its monumental architecture, the symbolic imagery, and the apparent absence of clear domestic features like ordinary houses within the core monumental area. That is the responsible statement. It does not oversell, it does not pretend the word temple is a scientific measurement. Proven. The enclosures are monumental and carefully built. Proven, the pillars carry symbolic imagery. Proven, the architecture seems designed for gatherings and attention, not just for sleeping and cooking. Proven, the site's character is unusual compared to a straightforward residential settlement, especially in the iconic enclosure zones people photograph. But the moment you say temple, you import a whole suitcase of assumptions. You imagine permanent priesthoods, formal doctrine, and organized religion the way later civilizations do it. That is where speculation sneaks in wearing a tie. Historians still argue whether Göbeklitepe should be described as a temple complex, a set of communal ritual spaces, a feasting and meeting hub, or a multifunctional site that blends ceremony with social organization and even some everyday activities. That debate is real and ongoing because the evidence can support multiple models. So you try on a few models like you are in a sleepy museum gift shop, except everything is conceptual. Model 1. Temple. This is the headline. Model. It emphasizes ritual focus, special gatherings, symbolic imagery, and the idea that people traveled here for ceremonies. Model 2. Ritual gathering hub. This model keeps the ritual emphasis but avoids later religion baggage. It imagines dispersed groups meeting periodically, reinforcing social ties, exchanging mates, sharing stories, settling disputes, and doing rituals as part of the glue. Model 3. Social feasting center. This model leans into the idea that big meals, seasonal gatherings, and cooperative labor could drive monument building. Ritual might still be present, but the engine is social and economic bonding. Model 4. Multifunctional place. This model says, stop trying to make it one thing. Humans are rarely one thing. The site could host ritual, feasting, craft activity, and community decisions, shifting over time. The proven basket says, we cannot reduce it to just a temple or just a party spot without ignoring complexity. The site likely held special significance. That much is hard to deny. Now for your quirky tidbit, the one that sits on the edge of scholarly conversation and popular fascination. Early interpretations emphasized that Göbeklitepe was built by hunter-gatherers before agriculture, and some writers framed it as proof that religion came first and farming followed to support temple builders. It is a compelling story, It has drama. It has causality. It also risks being too tidy. New evidence and broader regional research complicate the idea, suggesting that early cultivation and changing lifeways were already in motion in the region. So the religion-invented agriculture claim slides into the interesting hypothesis, not proven category. You stand still for a moment, listening to the imaginary murmur of ancient crowds. You picture people arriving with gifts, meat, tools, maybe even obligations. You picture shared labor, shared meals, shared tension. This is the part where your modern brain wants to say, so it's like a festival. And, honestly, that might not be a terrible analogy, as long as you remember that festivals can be sacred, political, economic, and intensely emotional all at once. A festival is not just fun, it is social technology. Historians still argue whether large-scale feasting was a primary driver for people gathering at Göbeklitepe, or whether feasting was secondary to ritual obligations. And yes, that sounds like a debate about whether the wedding is about love or about the open bar. Humans never change. Now you examine the evidence types that feed these models. Architecture. Monumental enclosures suggest special-purpose spaces. The arrangement of central pillars and surrounding pillars could support ceremonial movement and focus. Artifacts. Stone tools and animal bones indicate activity, including food processing and consumption. The types of bones and cut marks can suggest feasting patterns. Domestic indicators. The apparent lack of standard domestic architecture in the core monumental area supports interpretations that it is not a typical village center, though nearby areas and later phases complicate that picture. Spatial layout. The enclosure's positioning and the mound's growth suggest repeated building and a long-term commitment. Now you step carefully into what is not proven. Not proven, a formal priesthood. Not proven, a single, unified religion. Not proven, that every enclosure served the same function. Not proven, that everyone who came here had the same beliefs. People can share a place without sharing an identical theology. Think of modern stadiums. Everyone agrees on the seating. Not everyone agrees on the meaning of existence. Light joke number 1. Because the word temple makes you picture staff. If this was a temple, then somewhere in the ancient world there was a guy whose entire job was basically move heavy stone, look spiritual. And he hated it. He was like, I joined for the chanting, not the lifting. You take a breath and let the moonlit stones remind you that vocabulary matters. When you call it a temple, you frame it as primarily religious. When you call it a social hub, you emphasize community. When you call it a ritual center, you keep it open. The Calm Guide chooses ritual and communal gathering spaces as a cautious umbrella term because it respects the evidence while leaving room for debate. But you also notice how the architecture feels like it wants you to believe in something. Not necessarily gods, but significance. The central pillars face each other like a dialogue, and the whole enclosure draws you inward. That is not an accident. Even if the function was social, it was social with choreography. Humans do not lift multi-ton stones just to have a casual hangout. Even your most committed friend cannot get you to rearrange furniture without bribing you with snacks. Light joke number 2. If you have ever helped someone move apartments, you know monuments are not built just because. There is always a deeper reason, even if that reason is, I told everyone I would do it and now I can't back out. Now you slide into the next layer of calm analysis. A label like temple can also be influenced by modern storytelling. Archaeology needs public interest, funding, and protection. Oldest temple is a headline that travels. It becomes shorthand. Shorthand becomes myth. Myth becomes people arguing online as if they personally attended the ceremonies. Your job tonight is to take the shorthand, open it up, and breathe into it. So your summary in your head sounds like this. Proven. Göbeklitepe contains monumental enclosures with symbolic imagery, suggesting special communal functions. Likely, the site hosted gatherings involving ritual and social bonding, possibly feasting, and likely served as a focal point for groups in the region. Unknown. Whether it fits the later concept of temple with formal religious institutions, and exactly what ceremonies took place. Historians still argue whether the phrase First Temple clarifies the site's significance or distorts it by forcing a later category onto a much earlier world. And you can feel both sides. The phrase grabs attention. It also oversimplifies. Light joke number 3. Soft as a yawn. Calling it a temple is like calling your phone a telegraph. Technically communication, but you're going to confuse the timeline and annoy everyone. You let that settle, and you keep moving. The next question rises naturally, because once you have a place that might be ceremonial, you immediately want to know who are the people capable of doing this. Not a mysterious, vanished race. Not superheroes. Actual humans with actual tools and actual knees that probably hurt. So you walk onward, ready to meet the builders. Not as legends, but as living bodies in an early Neolithic world. You keep drifting forward, and the word who starts to feel heavier than the stones. Because if hunter-gatherers built this, then your mental picture of hunter-gatherers needs an upgrade. Not a Hollywood upgrade with leather costumes and perfect hair. A real upgrade. Organized, skilled, socially complex, and capable of long-term projects. Your calm guide voice stays steady, because the internet loves to answer who built it with someone mysterious. And you are here to rescue the humans from being erased by drama? Mainstream historical fact. The people associated with Göbeklitepe lived during the early Neolithic transition in the Fertile Crescent region, and the archaeological evidence suggests they were primarily hunter-gatherers or forager-hunters, with emerging forms of plant management and increasing settlement complexity in the broader region. That is the responsible frame. It avoids the cartoon version of pure nomads, and also avoids the equally cartoonish, fully formed farmers. Now you slow your steps and imagine the material traces that tell you about builders. Not their names, not their myths, but their hands. Proven. The toolkits at Göbeklitepe include lots of chipped stone tools, especially flint, because flint is the Swiss Army knife of the prehistoric world. You can cut, scrape, carve, butcher, and basically do your entire life with it, as long as you do not mind the fact that it breaks and you have to keep making more. The presence, variety, and distribution of tools matter because they show activity patterns, working stone, processing animals, and maintaining the site. Proven, there are animal bones, and those bones are a direct line into daily subsistence and communal eating. You're not imagining an ethereal priesthood living on moonlight and mysterious energies. You are imagining humans who eat meat, crack bones, and leave behind messy evidence. That is comforting in a strange way. It makes them real. Now, the big question. How do you go from humans with flint tools to humans raising pillars taller than a basketball hoop and heavier than your entire neighborhood? This is where you have to respect organization without inventing an empire. Proven. Quarrying and carving limestone is possible with stone tools, especially with enough time, skill, and labor. Proven. The builders knew how to shape stone into consistent forms and how to transport and set them. That implies planning. Planning implies leadership, coordination, and shared purpose. Speculated. A centralized state. Speculated. Kings, palaces, taxes, There is no evidence for that kind of political structure at this time and place. People can coordinate large projects without having a state in the later sense. Humans do it all the time. You have seen it in barn raisings, communal irrigation, and yes, even in modern fandoms organizing events that somehow run on spreadsheets and pure obsession. Historians still argue whether Göbeklitepe's construction required a permanent elite directing labor or whether it could be achieved through periodic gatherings, shared traditions, and cooperative obligation among multiple groups. That is a serious debate, because it touches the heart of how complex society emerges. You can feel it. The question is not just who built it. It is, what kind of social world makes something like this possible? Now, your mind wants to picture the builders as either primitive or impossibly advanced. The calm guide refuses both extremes. You imagine them as capable. They know the landscape. They know seasons. They know how to track animals. They know how to knap flint into sharp edges with the kind of muscle memory you wish you had for folding fitted sheets. They know limestone's quirks. They know how many people it takes to pull something. They know which ropes will snap. They know who is strong, who is skilled, and who cannot be trusted near the important carving because he always gets creative. Light joke number 1. Every ancient community has that one guy who is like, "What if the fox had abs?" And everyone else is like, "No, no abs. Just carve the fox." Now you look at the broader regional picture. Because builders do not exist in a vacuum, the area around Göbeklitepe sits within the Fertile Crescent, where early cultivation and animal management eventually flourish. Nearby sites show early villages, communal buildings, and symbolic art. That matters because it suggests Göbeklitepe is not a miracle dropped onto an empty map. It is part of a cultural landscape where people are experimenting with new forms of gathering, sharing, and building. Proven. The builders were not writing in a script you can read today. At least not one archaeologists have found at this site. So the who remains anonymous. This anonymity is a magnet for speculation. If names are missing, people fill them in. Enter the fringe characters. Atlanteans, Anunnaki, ancient astronauts, a lost global civilization. You can almost hear them knocking politely on your imagination's door. The calm guide answers, "Thank you for visiting, but we are only letting in claims that have evidence. There is no proven evidence of non-human builders. There is no proven evidence of advanced metal tools. There is no proven evidence of machinery. The craftsmanship is impressive, but it is consistent with what humans can do with stone tools, time, and coordination. The most extraordinary thing here is not aliens. It is us. Here is your quirky tidbit, and it is a good one. Some researchers have emphasized how Göbeklitepe challenges older narratives that hunter-gatherers were always small-scale and politically simple. The site suggests that even before full farming, life, people could organize complex social events and monumental projects. That is not fringe. But it becomes fringe-adjacent when people twist it into, therefore archaeologists were wrong about everything and the textbooks are a lie. Calmly. Textbooks update because evidence accumulates. That is not a scandal. That is science doing its job. Historians still argue whether Göbeklitepe represents a unique experiment that did not become the dominant model, or whether it reflects a broader and more common pattern of early communal monument building that we simply have not found enough examples of yet. This is a subtle debate about the archaeological record itself. Sites survive unevenly. Some get destroyed. Some remain buried. What we know is always a partial sample. You stand near the imagined quarry in your mind. You see people cutting into limestone. You see chips flying. You see someone wiping sweat with the back of their hand. You see someone else standing a little too close and getting yelled at because safety rules apparently existed in the form of move or you will get hit. The work is loud, physical, repetitive. And then, in the evening, it becomes social. People talk, people eat, people tell stories. And in those stories, the pillars gain their meaning. This is a calm but powerful idea. Meaning can motivate labor. Shared belief can coordinate people. So can shared identity. So can the promise of food. So can the pressure of tradition. We do this because we have always done it. That phrase can move mountains, or at least move stones. Light joke number 2. If you think modern peer pressure is bad, imagine prehistoric peer pressure. Are you coming to help raise the pillar? And you're like, I'm kind of tired. And everyone just stares until you pick up a rope. No excuses. No calendar conflicts. Just rope. Now you bring it back to the proven versus speculated boundaries. Proven. The builders were human communities in the early Neolithic world of Upper Mesopotamia and southeastern Anatolia. Likely, they were foragers and early cultivators interacting in a region of rapid change, with social mechanisms capable of organizing large cooperative projects. Unknown, the exact social structure, whether leadership was permanent or situational, and how different groups negotiated access and meaning at the site. And because this is bedtime history, you let the unknown stay gentle rather than frustrating. The anonymity of the builders is not a gap to fill with aliens. It is a reminder that human history is vast, and most of it is carried by people whose names do not survive. You can still honor them by taking them seriously. As you continue walking, you feel the next topic approaching like the smell of smoke on cool air. If people gathered here, they probably ate here. They probably celebrated here. They probably turned labor into a social event. The evidence for feasting and maybe even early beer starts tugging at your attention. So you drift onward, following the invisible trail from builders to banquets. Because nothing builds community faster than shared food and the promise of something warm and fermented. You keep walking. Now the hill feels less like a monument and more like a campsite that got very, very out of hand. Because once you accept that real humans built this, the next question is almost inevitable. What kept them coming back? What fueled the labor? What made the ropes get pulled again and again, seasons after season, until the stones stood up like stubborn thoughts? Your nose almost imagines it before your brain does. Smoke. Roasting meat. Hot fat crackling. The kind of scent that makes you forgive your neighbors and volunteer for hard work. You're entering the feasting zone, where the evidence gets delightfully tangible. Mainstream historical fact. Excavations at Göbeklitepe have produced substantial quantities of animal bones and other remains that indicate people processed and consumed animals at or near the site, which supports interpretations involving communal gatherings and feasting. That is the grounded claim. Bones do not lie about being eaten. They just sit there and get catalogued, which is their own quiet afterlife. Proven. There are animal remains. Proven. They include species like wild gazelle and other game animals that would have been hunted in the region. Proven. The quantity and context of bones suggest significant consumption events, not just a lonely snack. When you find lots of animal bones in certain contexts, especially with butchery marks and patterns, it is reasonable to talk about feasting or large meals. Now, you keep your calm guide posture because feasting is where people start slipping in very modern assumptions. They picture formal banquets with assigned seating and someone giving a toast. You could have had something like that, but you do not need it. Feasting can be messy. It can be people sitting on the ground, passing meat, arguing, laughing, negotiating marriages, settling grudges, and making promises they regret in the morning. That is still feasting. Historians still argue whether feasting at Göbeklitepe was the main driver of gathering and labor, or one component of broader ritual and social processes. That is the real debate. Was food the engine, or was it the reward? Or was it the sacred act itself? Now you scoop up the part everyone loves, the beer question. Here is your quirky tidbit. And it is a fan favorite, so some researchers have suggested that fermentation might have played a role in gatherings at Göbeklitepe, based on the presence of large stone vessels and certain residue interpretations proposed by some teams and commentators. The Calm Guide translation is, "It is plausible that early fermentation or beer-like drinks existed in this world, and communal drinking is a powerful social glue. But the specific claim, Göbeklitepe had beer and we can prove it conclusively, is more complicated than a meme makes it sound. Proven, there are large stone containers at the site. Proven, in early Neolithic contexts, people elsewhere in the region and later periods are known to experiment with fermentation. Likely, people here could have used plant materials to make mildly alcoholic or fermented beverages. Unknown, the exact recipes, the frequency, and whether the vessels were specifically for beer versus other uses like the water, food storage, or mixing plant mash. So you keep possible fermentation in the likely but debated basket, not in the guaranteed ancient brewery basket. You walk and imagine the logistics of a feast. This is where the human story becomes vivid without becoming ungrounded. If multiple groups gather, you need food, you need planning, you need hunting parties, you need coordination. If hunting is successful, you get surplus meat in a short window. That encourages big gatherings. Big gatherings encourage shared work. Shared work encourages monuments. The logic is not crazy. It is human. But you also remember your earlier rule. Do not turn a plausible chain into a proven chain unless the evidence directly supports each link. What directly supports it? The remains of animals and tools, the scale of the site, the repeated gatherings implied by long use. That makes feasting a strong interpretation. What does not directly support it? The idea that feasting alone explains everything. Humans rarely do anything for one reason. They might come for ritual obligations, come for social negotiation, come for identity, come for seasonal timing, and yes, come for the food. You have attended enough modern events to know that the official reason and the actual reason can coexist. We are here for the conference, everyone says, while secretly thinking, I'm here for the free pastries. Light joke number 1. If early Göbeklitepe had a sign at the entrance, it would not say, "Welcome, pilgrims." It would say, "Bring snacks or bring muscle." Now you let your mind pan outward beyond the carved pillars. Imagine the outskirts of the site during a gathering. Fires, butchering areas, flint napping spots where people repair tools, someone making cordage, someone hauling water, someone trying to keep kids from running into the dramatic snake-carved pillar like it is a playground. And then, when the meal starts, it becomes a social machine. Food distribution can reinforce status. It can create obligations. It can mark alliances. A leader does not need a crown if they control the timing of the feast. A group does not need a state if they share a tradition strong enough to pull them together. Historians still argue whether Göbeklitepe reflects emerging social stratification, with some individuals or groups gaining special influence through organizing labor and feasts, or whether the gatherings were more egalitarian, coordinated through shared ritual norms rather than permanent hierarchy. This is one of those debates where both sides can be partly true depending on the moment. A community can be mostly egalitarian most days and still have leaders during big events. Humans love temporary authority. You're in charge of the ropes. Okay, but only for today. Light joke number 2. You know, someone at Göbeklitepe was the ancient equivalent of the guy who brings a guitar to the campfire. Not because anyone asked, but because he believes the moment needs vibes. And everyone is too polite to stop him because he also happens to be really good at hauling stone. Now you circle back to evidence again, because the calm guide always returns to the ground. Animal bones, evidence for consumption and butchery. Stone tools, evidence for hunting and processing. Large containers, evidence for storage or mixing, possibly fermentation. Spatial patterns, evidence for repeated activity zones. Put together, the picture of gatherings gets strong. But there is another layer. Gatherings do not just make monuments. Monuments make gatherings. Once the enclosures exist, they become a magnet. They create tradition. They create obligation. People return because returning is part of belonging. That is the sort of feedback loop historians consider when they talk about how social complexity can grow without agriculture being fully established first. The old story used to be, farming leads to villages, leads to monuments. Göbeklitepe hints that the timeline can be more tangled. Gatherings and monuments could coexist with foraging, helping push social changes that later support farming. Not proven as a single cause, but plausible as part of a broader regional process. Historians still argue whether Göbeklitepe should be seen as a driver of the Neolithic transition, a symptom of it, or a parallel development emerging from the same pressures and opportunities. That debate is the heart of why this place matters. It is not just old. It is strategically old, sitting at a turning point. Light joke number 3, sleepy and gentle. If fermentation did happen here, then honestly, that might be the most relatable part of prehistory. You cannot get people to work hard without either money or snacks, and these people did not have money. So, do the math. You slow your steps and let the imagined feast fade into the cool night again. The stones stay quiet, but now you feel them differently. Not just as ritual objects, but as anchors for community gatherings where labor, food, and meaning braid together. And naturally, as your brain chews on that, it starts looking upward. Because the moment you imagine gatherings around pillars, you imagine night gatherings, firelight, shadows, stories. And then, above it all, the sky. The temptation to connect Göbeklitepe to astronomy begins to shimmer at the edge of your mind, like a distant star. So you keep moving, calm and curious, ready to explore alignments and star talk without letting your imagination declare victory too early. You keep walking, and without even trying, your eyes lift toward the sky. The canopy above the excavation is modern, but the sky beyond it is the same old ceiling that has watched every human gathering since humans first looked up and thought, is that a pattern, or am I just tired? It is natural to wonder about astronomy here. A site this old, this monumental, and this symbol-heavy almost begs you to project constellations onto it like your brain is a sleepy movie projector. This is the section where your calm guide voice becomes extra important. Because astronomy is where speculation dresses up as math and tries to look official. Numbers can be persuasive even when the assumptions underneath them are wobbly. Mainstream historical fact. Some researchers and many popular writers have proposed astronomical interpretations for aspects of Göbeklitepe's layout and imagery. But these interpretations remain debated and are not universally accepted as proven. That sentence is not as exciting as "it's a star map," but it is honest. Honesty is soothing. Soothing is what you want at bedtime, right up until you remember you asked for Göbeklitepe, and now your brain is sprinting. So let's sort the baskets. Proven, the builders could see the sky clearly, with minimal light pollution. People in prehistoric contexts often track seasons and celestial cycles because it helps with timing migrations, hunting, and gatherings. The enclosures have orientations you can measure, not proven that any particular alignment is intentional, that any particular carving is a constellation, that there is a single coherent astronomical system encoded across the site. That is the calm baseline. Now you imagine standing in one of the enclosures at night, firelight flickering, the pillars casting long shadows like slow-moving clock hands. It is easy to picture people using the sky as part of ritual, not because you want to be mystical, but because humans love the sky. It is the biggest shared storybook we have ever had. Historians still argue whether any alignments at Göbeklitepe reflect deliberate astronomical targeting, or whether observed orientations can be explained by practical construction choices, topography, and the cumulative accident of building multiple structures over time. That debate exists because pattern recognition is tricky when you have many possible directions, many structures, and a lot of missing context. Here is how the speculation typically goes, and you can watch it like a slow-motion magic trick. Step 1. Measure an enclosure's orientation. Step 2. Select a celestial object that could plausibly rise or set in that direction during the site's active period. Step 3. Propose that the builders intended that object to be highlighted. Step 4. Link carvings to constellations to support the idea. Step 5. Conclude that the entire site is a sophisticated astronomical observatory or a coded message about cosmic events. Each step can be plausible. The problem is the chain. If any link is weak, the whole chain starts swinging. Your job tonight is to keep that chain from clanking around in your head like loose keys. Now for the quirky tidbit. One of the most popular fringe-adjacent claims is that a particular pillar, sometimes singled out in public discussion, depicts symbols that correspond to constellations and records a specific date, sometimes tied to a hypothesized catastrophic event like a comet airburst. People love this because it feels like solving a puzzle once damn. Look, the scorpion is Scorpius. Look, the bird is Cygnus. Look, the alignment fits this year. It is a seductive story, but it is still speculative because the identifications of animals with specific constellations are not firmly established, and statistical tests and methodological critiques have been raised in scholarly and skeptical discussions. In calm terms, you can propose it. You cannot declare it proven. Now you do something very soothing. You separate astronomy in general from this specific astronomical claim. Astronomy in general is almost certainly part of human life here. People notice the moon. They notice the seasonal drift of sunrise and sunset points. They notice stars returning in cycles. Even if they do not write it down, they can encode it in stories and practices. But that does not mean Göbeklitepe is an observatory in the later formal sense. Proven. No one has excavated a sign that says, "Welcome to Göbeklitepe Planetarium." And yes, I know you were hoping. Historians still argue whether the most important calendar for the builders was celestial, ecological, or social. In other words, were gatherings scheduled by star positions, by animal migrations and plant cycles, or by tradition and agreement. Probably some mix, but the weight of that mix is not proven. You let in light joke number 1, because star talk always makes people pretend they understand astronomy. If Göbeklitepe is a star map, then I would like to formally apologize to the stars, because humans will map anything. We will see a fox and go, "Ah, yes, the constellation of Fox, clearly rising at dawn in the month of my life, is falling apart." Now you go back to the measurable. Orientations. Different enclosures can have different alignments. If one enclosure points towards something interesting, another might not. That does not kill the astronomy idea, but it complicates the single system narrative. It could mean multiple groups, multiple phases, multiple intentions. Or it could mean that orientation is driven by terrain, existing structures, and construction convenience. The hill itself has contours. The builders are working with a slope, with bedrock, with earlier features. Sometimes a wall goes where it can go, not where Orion demands. Light joke number 2. You know how you arrange furniture, according to Feng Shui, but really it is because the couch does not fit anywhere else? Same energy. Ancient couch is a multi-ton pillar. But still, now, you also keep in mind the site's long use. If the sky changes due to precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis, then an alignment that works for 1 century might shift over millennia. People who build and rebuild might update alignments, or they might not care. The point is, time complicates celestial claims. This is why historians still argue whether alignments proposed by modern researchers are robust across plausible date ranges or cherry-picked to match a desired narrative. Methodology matters. Are you selecting the alignment first and then finding a star? Or are you predicting a star and then testing whether the architecture matches it? The second is stronger. The first is how your brain finds shapes in clouds. Now you let your mind settle on the simplest calm conclusion. Proven, people here lived under a dramatic sky and likely noticed celestial cycles. Likely, the sky could have been woven into stories and rituals connected to gatherings. Unknown, whether specific enclosures were intentionally aligned to specific celestial events, and whether carvings encode constellations. And because this is a sleep-friendly guide, you do not leave it hanging with anxiety. You let the unknown feel like a soft blanket rather than a missing puzzle piece. You do not have to solve it tonight. You can just hold it. As you move forward, the sky question naturally shifts into something more grounded but still spooky in that fun, PG-13 way. If people gathered here for rituals, what about death? What about human remains? What about those stories of skulls and strange practices that make your spine tingle even while you are cozy? You keep walking, and the stones feel quiet again. But now the quiet has a faint edge, like you are about to turn a corner into a room where the past keeps a few unsettling souvenirs. You keep moving, and the night air feels a touch tighter now, as if the hill is about to show you something you cannot unsee but also cannot fully understand. This is the part of Göbeklitepe that people love to sensationalize, because nothing sells mystery like the word skull. And yes, your brain is already imagining dramatic music. Calmly, you tell it to lower the volume. Mainstream historical fact: human remains have been found in the broader archaeological context of Göbeklitepe, and some evidence has been discussed in relation to Neolithic mortuary practices, including modified skull fragments. But interpretations of what exactly was practiced at the site remain debated. That is the careful sentence, the one that keeps you from slipping into clickbait. Now you separate what is physically present from what is narratively tempting. Proven. Some human bone material has been recovered at the site, so some skull fragments show modifications that suggest deliberate human action rather than random breakage. Similar periods and nearby regions show a wider pattern of special treatment of human skulls, often called skull cult practices in older literature, where skulls could be curated, displayed, or plastered. Not proven that Göbeklitepe was primarily a death temple, that the enclosures were designed mainly for human sacrifice, that every skull fragment implies a single, uniform ritual. And that last one is important. The human brain loves one-story explanations. But sites like this are layered. Practices can change across generations. Different groups can use the same place differently. One site, one meaning is usually a modern fantasy. Historians still argue whether the skull modifications at Göbeklitepe indicate display practices. ancestor veneration, ritual marking, trophy taking, or something else entirely. That debate is not about whether bones exist. It is about what those bones mean in their cultural setting. Now you let yourself approach the imagery that makes people shiver, the idea of skulls being hung, carried, or set apart. It is creepy if you imagine it with modern horror movie eyes. But in many ancient contexts, bones are not taboo in the same way. A skull can be a symbol of ancestry, identity, and continuity. It can be a reminder that the dead are still part of the community. Or it can be an emblem of victory in conflict, or it can be an object used in ritual drama. All of these options exist in the human repertoire. So you keep your calm tone and do what a good guide does. You widen the lens. In the pre-pottery Neolithic world, there is evidence at various sites for special mortuary treatments, including removing skulls from bodies after decomposition and sometimes modifying or decorating them. This is not unique to Göbeklitepe, though the details differ by site. The broader pattern helps you avoid treating Göbeklitepe as uniquely macabre. It was a world where new forms of community were emerging, and communities often negotiate identity through the dead. Here comes your quirky tidbit, the one that feels like it belongs in a late-night conversation. Some discussions around Göbeklitepe highlight carved grooves or marks on skull fragments that might relate to suspending or displaying them. If true, that suggests an intentional public or semi-public presentation. But again, the leap from display to sacrifice cult is not proven. Display can be reverent. Display can be warning. Display can be memory. The motivation is not etched into the bone. Light joke number 1. Because you need a pressure release. Humans have always been collectors. Today, someone collects sneakers. 10,000 years ago, someone might have been like, "This is my honored ancestor's skull. Please do not touch it." Which is the ancient version of "Don't crease my shoes." Now you bring your attention back to the enclosures themselves. People love to imagine blood rituals in the stone circles because it makes the architecture feel like a movie set. But the evidence for that kind of story is not solid. There is no proven pattern of mass human remains in the core enclosures. The site does not present itself like a slaughterhouse. The more grounded interpretation is that mortuary symbolism and practice might be part of the broader ritual life of the site, not necessarily the entire purpose. Historians still argue whether Göbeklitepe's primary rituals focused on the living community bonding through feasting and shared symbolism, or whether death and ancestor veneration played a central role in why people gathered. This is a meaningful debate because it shapes the emotional tone of the site. Festival-like versus funerary-like? Reality could include both. In different proportions at different times. You take a slow breath and you imagine the human experience, not just the evidence. If you live in a world where survival is hard and life expectancy is uncertain, death is not a distant concept. It is present. It shapes your stories. It shapes your rituals. A place like Göbeklitepe might be where the community processes that reality together, using stone and symbol to make something stable in a fragile world. Now you sort the common sensational claims into their proper baskets. Claim: they sacrificed people here. Evidence: not proven as a systematic practice at Göbeklitepe. Claim: it was a skull cult headquarters. Evidence: there are skull-related finds and broader regional parallels. But the degree and nature at Göbeklitepe is debated. Claim: the carvings show death rituals. Evidence: some animal imagery, like birds, has been interpreted in mortuary contexts elsewhere. But direct proof of the exact meaning here is not definitive. The calm guide voice stays gentle because fear is a loud emotion, and you do not want loud emotions at bedtime. Light joke number 2. Softly. If you're the kind of person who gets creeped out by bones, you would not have done well here. Ancient, you would have been the one constantly saying, "Can we please not put that on display?" And everyone would have been like, "Relax. It's Grandpa." Now you pivot to what matters for proven versus speculated. The limits of interpretation. Bones are evidence of bodies. Marks are evidence of actions. They are not evidence of motives by themselves. Motive is where culture lives, and culture is the hardest thing to reconstruct. You can infer, you can compare, you can propose, but you have to keep the labels honest. Historians still argue whether skull modifications reflect a shared regional ideology of the head as a seat of identity and power, or whether the practices are more localized, varied, and situation-dependent. Even the term skull cult is debated because it can oversimplify diverse practices into a single spooky phrase. Archaeologists sometimes keep using it because it is shorthand, but shorthand can be misleading. Remember your temple label lesson? Same energy. Light joke number 3, because shorthand is basically the villain tonight. Skull cult is such a dramatic phrase. It is like calling your family photo album a face worship shrine. Technically, sure, but also, please stop. As you continue walking, you feel the hill shift again. The creepy edge recedes, replaced by another kind of curiosity. If people treated the dead in special ways, if they gathered for rituals and feasts, and if the site evolved over time, then one question becomes very hard to ignore. Why did they bury it? Why did they fill these enclosures in, covering their own monumental work? That is the next doorway, and it is a big one, because deliberate burial is where speculation throws a party, so you keep moving, calmer now, letting the school stories settle into their proper boxes, and you step toward the mystery of the backfill with the steady confidence of someone who refuses to be spooked into sloppy thinking. You keep walking, and the hill starts to feel like it is holding a secret with both hands. Not a supernatural secret, a practical, human secret. The kind where someone makes a decision and then commits to it so thoroughly that 10,000 years later you're still standing here asking, why would you do that? Because here is the thing that makes Göbeklitepe feel extra strange. Parts of it were deliberately buried. Mainstream historical fact. Many of Göbeklitepe's monumental enclosures were intentionally backfilled with large amounts of material, including stone and debris, which helped preserve the structures but also raises questions about why the builders chose to cover them. That is a real, evidence-based statement. You can see the fill. You can analyze it. You can tell it is not just random sediment drifting in like sleepy snow. Now you stand at the edge of this idea, and you feel how quickly your mind wants to leap. Deliberate burial triggers modern instincts. People think cover-up. People think sealed vault. People think they hid it from something. People think they wanted to preserve it for a future age. As if the builders had a calendar app reminding them to protect it for your TikTok feed. So you slow down and you sort. Proven. The enclosures were filled in with material that appears to have been placed there intentionally. The fill includes a mix of stones, soil, and cultural debris such as tools and bones. The act of filling happened during the site's active life, not just as a result of later natural processes. Not proven that the burial was a panic response to catastrophe, that it was meant to hide forbidden knowledge, that it was an attempt to lock away something dangerous, that it was done by outsiders who conquered the builders. The calm guide voice stays steady. Intentional backfill is unusual, but unusual does not automatically mean mystical. Historians still argue whether the backfilling was primarily practical, symbolic, social, or some combination, and whether it happened quickly in episodes or gradually over time. That debate exists because the fill is both evidence and a puzzle. It preserves and obscures at the same time. Like a blanket you are grateful for and annoyed by. Now you consider the practical explanations first, because practical explanations are often underestimated. Practical possibility. 1. Structural stability. If you build tall stone pillars in an enclosure, backfilling could help support them and stabilize walls over time, especially if the enclosure is being retired from active use. It is like packing the inside of a structure to keep it from collapsing. You do not need a cosmic reason to do that. You need gravity, practical possibility. 2. Site management. Maybe certain enclosures were no longer needed or had become unsafe, and filling them made the area usable again for new construction. You can build on top of a filled space more easily than on a hollow one. Remember, this hill is a layered project. New phases build over old phases. Practical possibility. 3. Sanitation and tidiness. Yes, I said tidiness, and I know your brain is like 10,000 years ago. But humans have always managed mess. If gatherings leave debris, bones, broken tools, and rubble, the simplest way to reset the space is to fill and level. You would be surprised what cleaning up can look like at scale. Now the symbolic explanations, which are not fringe. They are plausible because humans love ritual closure. Symbolic possibility. 1. Decommissioning a sacred space. Think of it like closing a shrine. You do not just walk away. You ritually retire it. You cover it, seal it, and mark the end of its active life. Deliberate burial could be a way of respecting the space, not hiding it. Symbolic possibility 2. Transformation. Burying could represent returning something to the earth, cycling it back into the world. That is a human idea that shows up again and again across cultures. What is powerful must be contained, not displayed forever. Historians still argue whether the act of burial at Göbeklitepe reflects ritual closure practices similar to those seen in other prehistoric contexts, or whether the scale and pattern indicate something more utilitarian than symbolic. The tension is real because the backfill is massive. It is not one bucket of dirt. It is a project. Here comes your quirky tidbit for this section, because the backfill preserved the enclosures so well. Some people treat it like proof of intentional preservation for the future, almost like a time capsule. That is a romantic idea, and it is not impossible that people understood preservation in a basic sense. But the claim that they buried it specifically to save it for us is speculative. People bury things for their own reasons, in their own time, not for hypothetical viewers 10 millennia later. If they did it for you, they would also have left a note, and it would probably say, "Stop making up alien stories." Light joke number 1. If Göbeklitepe was buried as a time capsule, then it is the ancient equivalent of putting something in a closet and calling it organized. You are not preserving. You are hiding the mess. We have all done it. Now, you step into the part where speculation throws confetti. The sealed-to-hide secrets theory shows up everywhere. The buried after catastrophe theory shows up. The they were forced to bury it theory shows up. The they buried it because they knew the Younger Dryas comet was coming theory shows up. These ideas exist because deliberate burial feels dramatic. It feels like the final act of a story. But calm analysis asks, what does the fill actually contain? Does it look like hurried dumping? Does it look like careful layering? Are there signs of burning or destruction? Are there patterns of tool and bone deposition that suggest closure rituals? These are the kinds of questions archaeologists use to test whether burial was abrupt or gradual, chaotic or structured. Historians still argue whether the fill at Göbeklitepe represents a single rapid event for particular enclosures or a process of repeated infilling episodes over a long span. And if you are thinking, could it be both? Yes, humans can do both. They can have one enclosure retired suddenly after some social shift, while another fades out slowly over generations. Now you let yourself imagine a scenario that is not proven but is plausibly human. A gathering ends. A major leader dies. A new generation takes over. A shift in beliefs happens. Or maybe the social network changes, and different meeting places rise in importance. The old enclosure is still respected, but it is not central anymore, so people decide to close it. They fill it with debris from past gatherings, broken tools, leftover stone, bone fragments from feasts, maybe a few intentional deposits. They level it, then they build something else nearby, or on top. The old space becomes foundation, both literally and symbolically. That scenario does not require catastrophe. It requires change. Light joke number 2. You know the meeting where someone proposed burying the enclosure was intense. We should fill it in. Fill in the what? Yes. And then everyone sighed and started hauling rocks. The ancient equivalent of agreeing to repaint the entire house. Now you bring your calm guide voice even lower, because this is where you teach your sleepy brain how to hold uncertainty. Proven, backfilling happened, and it was intentional, likely. It served a mix of practical and symbolic functions, supporting a pattern of site evolution and architectural turnover, unknown. The specific social event or decision-making process that triggered each burial episode, and whether the motivations were consistent across time and enclosures. And that unknown is not a failure. It is a doorway to the broader regional story. Because once you accept that Göbeklitepe was built, used, and then buried in phases, you naturally ask, what was happening around it? What were neighboring communities doing? Were other sites doing similar things? How does this fit into the bigger picture of the Neolithic shift? That is where your feet want to take you next, outward, beyond the mound, into a landscape of other early sites that help you interpret Göbeklitepe not as a lone marvel, but as part of a wider human experiment. So you keep walking, and the hill feels less like a sealed secret now and more like a layered conversation, waiting for you to listen carefully and not jump to the loudest conclusion. You keep moving, and your focus stretches beyond the mound, like your mind is zooming out on a map, because one of the calmest ways to reduce speculation is to stop treating Göbeklitepe as a lonely miracle. The more alone a site feels, the easier it is for people to claim it must be supernatural, or inexplicable, or secretly connected to everything. But when you place it among neighbors, it becomes something even better, a clue inside a bigger story. Mainstream historical fact: Göbeklitepe sits within a region of southeastern Anatolia and upper Mesopotamia that contains multiple important early Neolithic sites. And comparative evidence from these places helps archaeologists understand Göbeklitepe's role in the broader transition toward more settled life and food production. This is basic, grounded scholarship. You do not interpret one site in a vacuum unless you enjoy being wrong with confidence. So you imagine the landscape around you: rolling hills, limestone outcrops, seasonal water sources, fields that are not fields yet, but could become fields, herd animals moving in patterns, wild cereals growing in patches, a place where small changes in climate stability and social organization can cascade into huge transformations. Now you start stacking evidence in your basket. There are other sites in this region with communal buildings, special architecture, and symbolic art. They are not carbon copies of Göbeklitepe, but they share a family resemblance. That matters because it suggests the impulse to build communal monumental or semi-monumental spaces is part of a broader cultural world. The more you compare, the less you need a lost civilization to explain anything. Historians still argue whether Göbeklitepe is best understood as the earliest peak of a wider tradition of communal monument building, or as a unique local expression that happened to survive and be discovered, while many others remain buried or lost. That debate is important because it shapes how exceptional we consider the site. Now you bring in the Neolithic shift itself, because this is where people's timelines tend to get sloppy. Proven, during the period when Göbeklitepe is active, the region is moving through the early stages of the Neolithic transition, which includes changes in settlement patterns, increased management of plants and animals, and eventually the development of agriculture and permanent villages. But this is not a single moment. It is not one day you hunt, the next day you farm. It is gradual, uneven, and regionally varied. Likely, groups in the broader area are experimenting with cultivating wild cereals, storing food, and returning seasonally to key places. Likely, increased social gatherings, trade, and shared ritual traditions help knit larger networks together. Unknown, exactly how Göbeklitepe fits into the cause and effect chain. Did it help drive the shift toward farming by pulling people into larger networks and creating new social demands? Or was it simply one expression of changes already underway? Historians still argue whether social and ritual complexity preceded large-scale agriculture, followed it, or co-evolved with it in a mutually reinforcing loop. This is the real scholarly drama. It is slow drama, the kind where people write long papers instead of shouting, but it is still drama. Now for your quirky tidbit, the popular narrative often says, Göbeklitepe proves hunter-gatherers built temples before farming. That is partly true in broad strokes, but can be oversimplified. The wider regional evidence suggests a mosaic. Some communities may be more settled. Some may be more mobile. Some may be experimenting with cultivation. The categories hunter-gatherer and farmer are not neat boxes here. They are overlapping tendencies. The fringe twist happens when someone treats that oversimplified narrative as proof that everything we know is wrong, rather than proof that early Neolithic life was more diverse and inventive than older textbook summaries suggested. You let that settle. It is soothing to realize that complexity is normal. The past is not a straight line. It is a braided river. Now, you take your calm guide voice and speak gently into the key comparative idea. Neighboring sites show that people were building special structures, practicing symbolic traditions, and forming larger social networks. Göbeklitepe is a spectacular example, but it is not the only hint of the pattern. When you see similar motifs or similar architectural impulses in different places, you do not need aliens. You need humans sharing ideas. Light joke number 1. Ancient cultural diffusion is the polite academic way of saying, someone visited and then copied the vibe. The first influencer economy, except the currency is carved stone and goat stew. Now you think about the rise of farming in a calm, evidence-first way. Proven, the region's environmental richness, including stands of wild cereals, makes plant management plausible. Proven, over time, evidence at various sites indicates increasing reliance on cultivated plants and managed animals. Likely, gatherings at places like Göbeklitepe could create pressure for reliable food supplies. If you promise a feast, you cannot always rely on luck. Cultivation becomes attractive, but you keep it as likely, not proven, because there are many reasons farming emerges. Climate, population, competition, storage technology, social prestige, risk management. It is never one magic lever. Historians still argue whether the ritual drives farming model is overemphasized, and whether ecological and demographic pressures provide a more consistent explanation, with ritual simply adapting to new lifeways. Again, both can be partly true. Human change is rarely single cause. Light joke number 2. If farming emerged partly because someone got tired of planning feasts with unpredictable hunting, that is the most relatable origin story ever. I cannot do this last-minute gazelle situation again. We are planting something. I'm stressed. Now you feel the story naturally leading toward the place where speculation gets loud again. Because once you mention broader region and shared symbolism, people start shouting, Anunnaki, like it is a karaoke cue. You can already feel it coming, like bass from a car a block away. But before you go there, you keep your calm summary. Proven, Göbeklitepe is part of an early Neolithic cultural landscape with other significant sites, and it belongs to a period of major social and economic transition. Likely, it played a role in social networking and communal practice, possibly connected to feasting and the pressures that encouraged more food management. Unknown. The exact causal relationship between Göbeklitepe's rituals and the development of agriculture and permanent settlement, and that unknown is exactly where modern imaginations like to throw in outsiders. A secret ancient race, a non-human teacher, a lost civilization. Because if a story feels too complex, people reach for a simple, someone else did it. That, naturally, is where you are heading next. The Anunnaki detour, the popular fringe theories, the stuff people whisper about on late-night forums with the confidence of someone who has never read an excavation report but has watched 3 documentaries and 1 extremely intense TikTok. You keep walking, and you promise yourself you will be kind but firm. You will not mock curiosity. You will just separate the proven stones from the speculative glitter. You keep moving. You can almost hear the internet clearing its throat. This is the part where someone leans in and whispers, "Okay, but what about the Anunnaki?" And your calm guide voice goes, "Ah, yes, the detour. Please keep your hands inside the vehicle and do not feed the conspiracy theories. You do not have to hate fringe ideas. You just have to treat them like dreams. Interesting, emotionally revealing, and not automatically true. Mainstream historical fact. There is no accepted archaeological evidence that Göbeklitepe was built by non-human beings or lost advanced civilization. Mainstream interpretations attribute the site to human communities in the early Neolithic of the region, based on excavation data, tool evidence, and comparative archaeology. That is the solid ground. It is not boring. It is actually amazing. Humans did this. Now, you calmly define what people usually mean when they say Anunnaki in this context, because the term gets used like a magic word. In ancient Mesopotamian texts, Anunnaki refers to a group of deities. That is the historical usage. The modern fringe usage often follows a different storyline, popularized in recent decades, that reimagines the Anunnaki as extraterrestrials who engineered humans or taught ancient people advanced knowledge. That modern storyline is not a proven reading of ancient texts in mainstream scholarship. It is a reinterpretation that has become its own mythology. So you place the word itself into the be careful category. Because when someone says Anunnaki, they might mean Mesopotamian gods, or they might mean space teachers, and those are very different claims. Historians still argue whether some modern popularizations of ancient Near Eastern mythology distort the original texts and contexts, and how much those distortions shape public interpretations of archaeological sites like Göbeklitepe. That is a polite academic way of saying, please stop turning everything into aliens. Now, you do the calm audit. Fringe claims usually come in a few recurring flavors. You take them one by one, like sorting laundry. Claim Ha'etun 1, the builders were too primitive. Calm response. This claim depends on underestimating what humans can do with stone tools and coordination. Evidence from many prehistoric contexts shows complex construction, long-distance exchange, and sophisticated artistry long before writing. Göbeklitepe is surprising. Yes, but surprise is not proof of impossibility. The evidence at the site includes stone tools, consistent with the period, and local materials, consistent with human quarrying. Claim 2. The carvings are a star map, therefore aliens. Calm response, even if some astronomical interpretation was supported. Astronomy is not alien. Humans watch the sky. Also, the identification of specific carvings as constellations is debated. A debated claim cannot be a foundation for a stronger, more extraordinary claim. That is like saying, I might have seen a shadow, therefore it was definitely Bigfoot and he owes me money. Claim 3. Deliberate burial means cover-up. Calm response. Deliberate backfill can be practical, symbolic, or both. And it occurs in other archaeological contexts. Covering a structure is not automatically hiding forbidden knowledge. Sometimes it is simply retiring it, stabilizing it, or building over it. The fill at Göbeklitepe contains everyday debris too, which fits mundane human processes better than a secret vault narrative. Claim 4. There must be a missing advanced tech layer. Calm response. If advanced technology were present, you would expect consistent evidence, metalworking residues, non-local synthetic materials, precision tool marks beyond stone tool capabilities, and widespread artifacts that do not fit the period. Göbeklitepe's evidence aligns with early Neolithic lifeways. Extraordinary tech leaves extraordinary trash, and humans leave trash like it is an art form. Like joke number 1. If aliens visited, they would have left behind at least one inexplicable charger cable. That is how you know a civilization was here. Now you address why these fringe ideas are so sticky. Because understanding the psychology helps you stay calm. Göbeklitepe is early. It is monumental. It has rich symbolism. It has deliberate burial. It has unanswered questions. That combination is like catnip for the human mind. People dislike uncertainty, and they dislike slow, careful explanations. Aliens are fast. Aliens are neat. Aliens are a single cause. Humans are messy. Humans require caveats. Humans require reading the boring part of the paper. Historians still argue whether public fascination with lost civilization narratives reflects a deeper discomfort with the real complexity of gradual cultural change. In other words, it is easier to believe in a teacher from the stars than to believe that your ancestors were just brilliant, stubborn, and coordinated. Now your quirky tidbit for this section is about how fringe narratives often cherry-pick. They will highlight Göbeklitepe's most dramatic features, but ignore the thousands of small, unglamorous bits of evidence, like flint flakes, tool types, and mundane animal bones. Because those do not fit a cosmic storyline. That is a red flag. Real explanations have to account for all the evidence, not just the cool parts. Light joke number 2. Cherry-picking evidence is like ordering a salad and then only eating the croutons. Technically, you interacted with vegetables, but we all know what happened. Now, because this channel has Anunnaki in the name, you do not pretend fringe ideas do not exist. You just put them in the right place. You treat them as modern myth-making. Myths can be meaningful. They can reveal fears and hopes. They can be fun, but they are not excavation data. So if you want to indulge the Anunnaki detour gently, you do it like this. You can imagine the builders telling stories of powerful beings, sky forces, creators, watchers. Many cultures do. But that doesn't mean literal extraterrestrials stood here directing construction. It means humans use the sky as a metaphor for power and mystery. That is normal. Historians still argue whether the earliest monumental sites in the region reflect emerging big gods concepts or more localized spirit and ancestor frameworks, and how those ideas evolve into later mythologies. That is a real scholarly question. It is about the evolution of belief, not the arrival of aliens. Light joke number 3. Soft as a sigh. If the Anunnaki really did teach humans everything, they forgot to teach us how to stop replying thanks to an email thread that should have died 3 messages ago. So maybe they were not that advanced. Now you gather your calm takeaways. Proven. Göbeklitepe was built by humans in the early Neolithic, using local materials and stone tool technology. Likely, the site's complexity reflects sophisticated social organization and symbolic life, not supernatural intervention. Unknown. Many details of meaning and practice, which is exactly why the site fascinates us. But unknown is not a blank check for any theory. And because you have completed the detour without crashing the vehicle, you steer back onto the main road. What do scholars actually debate today? Right now, in the real academic conversation, not the loudest internet claims, but the careful arguments about function, chronology, social structure, and symbolism. You keep walking, the night steady, the stones quiet, and you prepare to listen in on the genuine debates, the ones that make the site more interesting, not less. You keep moving, and it feels like you are leaving the loud roadside billboard of fringe claims behind and entering a quiet library where the arguments are slower, sharper, and honestly more satisfying. The academic debates around Göbeklitepe are not aliens versus no aliens. They are better. They are about how humans organize meaning, labor, and time when the world is changing under their feet. Mainstream historical fact, Göbeklitepe has been interpreted in multiple scholarly frameworks, and while many agree it had special communal functions, there is ongoing debate about its precise role, its relationship to emerging sedentism and agriculture, and the sequencing of its construction and use. That is the living heart of research. Agreement on the big picture, disagreement on the details that matter. You slow your steps and let the debates line up like quiet figures in a moonlit hallway. Debate 1. What kind of place is this? Really? You already felt this one in the temple section, but here it becomes more nuanced. Some scholars emphasize ritual specialization, a place primarily for ceremonies and symbolic performances. Others emphasize integration, a place where ritual, feasting, crafting, and social negotiation blend. Historians still argue whether Göbeklitepe was a dedicated ritual center separate from daily domestic life, or a multifunctional hub embedded in a broader settlement landscape where ritual and everyday are not cleanly separable categories. That is not just semantics. It changes how you imagine the rhythm of life here. Debate 2. How mobile were the builders? Were people traveling in from dispersed camps, gathering seasonally, then leaving? Or were there more settled communities nearby, maintaining ongoing connection? Evidence can be read both ways. Large gatherings suggest networks, but networks can be made by mobile people or by settled villages. Historians still argue whether the labor investment implies a more sedentary-based population than early interpretations assumed, or whether periodic aggregation events could generate enough workforce without permanent settlement at the core. This debate touches on a big question in human history. Do you need villages to build monuments, or can monuments help create villages? Light joke number 1. Modern, you struggles to get 5 friends to commit to a dinner reservation. Ancient, you might have organized a seasonal labor force. The past is embarrassing in a motivational way. Debate 3. Sequence and timing. Even with radiocarbon dates, the fine-grained sequence of building, remodeling, and backfilling is tricky. Different enclosures could overlap in time. Some might be rebuilt. Some might be filled while others remain active. This creates competing models of the site's life history. Historians still argue whether certain enclosures represent a rapid burst of monumental construction followed by a relatively swift shift, or whether Göbeklitepe's monumental phase was more prolonged and variable, with different traditions unfolding over centuries. The difference matters because a burst implies a particular kind of social moment, while a long variability implies enduring institutions or traditions. Debate 4. Meaning of the imagery. You already met the animals. Now, scholars ask, are these motifs clan symbols, mythic narratives, protective signs, references to hunting identity, or a shared symbolic language that shifts by enclosure? Historians still argue whether the iconography is primarily communicative between groups, like heraldry, or primarily cosmological, like mythic storytelling, or primarily performative, shaping the experience of ritual space through emotionally charged imagery. It could be multiple at once, and that multiplicity is where human symbolism loves to live. Light joke number 2. Imagine trying to explain your favorite meme to someone from a different friend group. That confusion is basically what interpreting iconography across time feels like. Except the meme is carved in limestone and your friends are 10,000 years dead. No pressure. Debate 5. Why bury it? You felt the mystery. Scholars still argue about the balance between practical and symbolic motivations. Was backfilling a ritual closure? Was it a structural strategy? Was it a social reset, marking the end of one tradition and the start of another? Historians still argue whether the backfill contains patterned deposits that indicate deliberate ceremonial closing events, or whether it is largely construction and occupation debris, used opportunistically to fill spaces as the site evolved. This debate is grounded in careful analysis of fill composition, layering, and the distribution of artifacts. Debate 6. Göbeklitepe and farming. This is the debate that makes the site famous beyond archaeology circles. Did ritual gathering help drive food production, or did early cultivation and changing subsistence already create the stability and population needed for gathering? Historians still argue whether Göbeklitepe should be placed as a causal catalyst in the Neolithic transition or as a parallel expression of the same underlying changes, like climate stabilization, resource concentration, and social competition. It is not either or. It is about waiting. Now, your quirky tidbit for this section is about how debates evolve. As new excavation seasons happen and new analytical techniques are applied, older interpretations get refined. This frustrates people who want one definitive answer forever. But it is exactly what you want if you like truth. The past is not changing. Your access to it is. Light joke number 3. Archaeology is basically the slowest plot twist industry on Earth. In 30 years, we will reveal another layer. Everyone gasps politely. Now you gather the calm guide takeaways from all these debates into a simple internal map. Proven. Göbeklitepe is monumental, early, and socially significant. Likely, it served communal functions involving ritual and feasting, drawing groups together in a changing early Neolithic world. Debated. The exact degree of specialization, the mobility of builders, the fine chronology, the meanings of symbols, and the motivations for burial. Unknown. The full story, because only part of the site is excavated, and because symbolism rarely yields a single translation. And here is the most bedtime-friendly truth. Uncertainty is not a threat here. It is the soft space where curiosity can breathe. You do not have to solve Göbeklitepe to appreciate it. You can let it remain a place of layered human intention, rocky hill where people built meaning with stone long before they built cities. As you continue walking, the end of the tour begins to approach naturally. You have carried 2 baskets all night, and now you are ready to set them down in a neat checklist. Proven, likely, unknown. A simple, calm guide you can keep in your head. So you move toward the exit, letting the wind cool your thoughts, and you prepare to leave Göbeklitepe not with a grand conclusion, but with clear categories and a quiet sense of awe that does not need to pretend it knows everything. You keep walking, and the hill begins to loosen its grip on you in that slow, gentle way a good story does when it knows you need sleep. The stones do not vanish, but they stop demanding answers. The moonlight makes everything softer, like the sight is giving you permission to leave with questions intact. This last stretch is where you gather your calm guide takeaways into something you can actually carry. Essay, not a debate transcript, not a conspiracy corkboard. A simple mental checklist, proven, likely, unknown. You can hold it like a smooth pebble in your palm. Mainstream historical fact, Göbeklitepe's monumental enclosures date to the early Neolithic period, making them among the earliest known examples of large-scale stone construction, and ongoing research continues to refine interpretations of their purpose and cultural context. That is the stable foundation. It is proven. It is enough to be amazing. Now you let your final sorting happen. Proven. You say these to yourself with calm confidence, like you are tucking them into bed. Göbeklitepe is a prehistoric site in southeastern Turkey with multiple monumental enclosures. The site includes T-shaped limestone pillars, some with carved reliefs of animals and symbols. Radiocarbon dating of associated organic materials places major activity broadly in the 10th to 9th millennia BCE, meaning it is far older than later famous monuments like the pyramids or Stonehenge. The enclosures show deliberate planning, repeated architectural patterns, and skilled stoneworking achievable with stone tools. There is abundant evidence of human activity, including stone tools and animal bones, indicating that people gathered, processed food, and lived real, physical lives connected to this place. Many enclosures were intentionally backfilled, which preserved them and shows deliberate human choice. You breathe out. Proven is soothing because it is firm. It holds you. Likely, now you shift into the supported but not final basket, the place where good interpretations live without pretending to be absolute. It is likely that Göbeklitepe functioned as a communal gathering place with strong ritual or ceremonial aspects. The architecture and imagery support this. It is likely that gatherings involved feasting because of the scale and nature of animal remains, and because food is a powerful reason for people to coordinate and returns. It is likely that the builders were human communities in the early Neolithic world, probably foragers with emerging plant management in a region moving toward farming and more settled life. It is likely that the animal imagery carried layered meanings connected to identity, myth, power, danger, and social signaling, even if we cannot translate it like a sentence. It is likely that the backfilling served a mix of practical and symbolic purposes, including stabilizing structures, retiring spaces, and reshaping the site for new phases. Historians still argue whether the site's primary role was ritual specialization or a multifunctional hub, and you allow likely to stay open while the argument continues. Light joke number 1. Because you have earned it. Likely is archaeology's version of I'm pretty sure, said by someone who has spent 5 years staring at dirt and refuses to be bullied by certainty. Unknown, and now, gently, you place your unanswered questions in the unknown basket without trying to solve them in the dark. We do not know the exact names, languages, or myths of the builders. We do not know precisely what each enclosure was used for, or whether the function shifted significantly from one to another. We do not know whether any proposed astronomical alignments were intentional, and claims that carvings are constellations remain debated. We do not know the full motivations behind every backfilling episode, or what social events triggered them. We do not know the complete site plan because only part has been excavated, and the unexcavated portions could adjust interpretations. Historians still argue whether Göbeklitepe was a driver of the Neolithic transition or a parallel expression of the same pressures and opportunities, and you keep that debate filed under fascinating, unresolved. Light joke number 2. Soft and sleepy. Unknown is not scary. Unknown is just the past, saying, "I'm not done telling you about myself yet," which is honestly a mood. Now you take one last slow look in your mind at the pillars, the carvings, the circles. You notice how your feelings have shifted since Section 1. At first, the site feels like a riddle daring you to guess the answer. Now it feels like a human place, a place where people use stone and symbol to build a shared center of gravity. They came together here, and that togetherness left traces that can still catch your breath. You also notice how your calm guide approach has changed the flavor of wonder. Wonder without evidence is sparkly but unstable. Wonder with evidence is heavier, warmer, and more satisfying. Like a blanket with real weight to it. Light joke number 3. Gentle as a yawn. If you ever feel tempted by a dramatic theory, just remember the simplest truth. Humans are fully capable of doing impressive things and then burying them for reasons that would sound like it seemed like a good idea at the time. And now, because this is bedtime history, you let the pacing slow further. You let your voice soften in your head. You let the hill recede behind you like a quiet friend who does not demand you keep talking. You walk down the slope. The wind becomes smoother. The grass is a soft whisper. The modern world waits at the edge. The road, the lights, the ordinary noises. But you carry something back with you. The sense that people have always been more complex than our labels, more capable than our stereotypes, and more mysterious than our desire for a single, neat story. You let your shoulders drop. You let your jaw unclench. You let your mind stop trying to solve anything. The stones can keep their secrets for now. They have held them for millennia. They can hold them for one more night while you rest. And as you step away, the imagery fades into something gentle. The pillars become silhouettes. The animals become quiet shapes. The sky becomes a calm, dark ceiling with a few patient stars, not demanding interpretation, just offering presence. Your breath slows. Your thoughts slow. You are safe, warm, and finished with questions for tonight. You simply drift, carrying the proven facts like steady footsteps, letting the likely interpretations hum softly like a fan, and letting the unknowns float away like distant shadows that do not need to be chased. End of script. Sweet dreams.